We're living in a time where AI doesn't just assist us, it creates with us. Today's guest has been part of every digital revolution we've lived through. From co founding one of the first internet agencies in the 90s to building a Storyvine, a company that taught technology how to tell human stories. Now he's exploring something even deeper, how artificial intelligence is becoming a creative partner, not just a tool. Kyle Shannon isn't just building technology, he's building bridges between human imagination and machine intelligence. In this conversation, we'll uncover that what it really means to stay human in the age of intelligence machines and what the future of storytelling looks like when creativity itself becomes shared. So, hey, Kyle, how are you? And welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Fahad. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me, and it is an honor to finally record this podcast with you. We've been in between the conversation, trying to figure things out, and now I'm finally having you here, and yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, we it took us a bit to get it scheduled, but we're here now, and I'm excited to talk with you.
Me too. I'm super excited. Um, so when you first started working with AI, did you imagine it would one day start creating with us instead of just helping us?
Well, yeah, if I look at my career has always been, somewhere at the intersection of new technology and storytelling or self-expression. And I've been interested in AI for many, many years. But until ChatGPT came out, AI was not all that accessible, right? So I remember distinctly for years, Google would, put out a statement about there's a new version of TensorFlow, and it's more user friendly than ever. And I'm like, okay, now I can go do AI. And I would go try to do AI, and I'm like, no, you still need to know mathematics and engineering and coding and things like that. So traditional AI really did require you to be, a technologist and an engineer and a mathematician and a data scientist, to play in it. And starting in 2022, I started exploring, some of the generative AI tools, like image generation tools like Stable Diffusion, and things like that. And I also, you know, played a little bit in the OpenAI playground, where you could play with the large language model. GPT-3 came out, I think, in 2022, and it made a little bit of noise because it was the first large language model that was starting to do things that AI promised, right, for everyday people. And then November 30th, 2022, I mark as the seminal moment where ChatGPT launches, and it does for AI and machine learning what the World Wide Web did for the internet, 30 odd years earlier. And which is that it made it accessible for people who are not mathematicians and engineers and things like that. So the minute it dropped, I instantly recognized it's here, because I'd essentially been waiting for it for 5 or 7 years or something like that. And the minute it showed up, I just started playing with it, and my immediate first thought, probably within two or three prompts, was the Turing test has been passed. And then my immediate thought after that was, maybe I could prompt this thing into being some sort of like computer conversation, like I see in sci-fi movies. And I realized that as I was trying to prompt it to be, um, I don't know, a creative partner, I realized it was already acting like one of those computers in sci-fi movies. And so I was immediately enamored with it. And I thought, yeah, this is the moment. Everything just changed. Like the phrase that popped in my head was, the world just changed, but no one knows it yet.
Exactly. You could talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
You've lived through the birth of the web. We all know about that. Social media and now AI.
Mhm.
What moment in all that made you stop and think this changes everything?
Well, when it the epiphany that I had in the early days of the web was I learned a little bit about the World Wide Web and HTML. This was in 1994, and I had an idea to put up an online magazine. The internet at that point was just full of research papers and dissertations and technical documents and things like that. And I thought, what if you put up something that's more about culture and things like that? So I had an idea for an online magazine called Urban Desires, and it was an art and culture magazine. So I taught myself enough HTML to put this thing on the internet and learned how to do that. And 3 weeks after I launched it, it was written about in a Parisian newspaper in French. And I was living in New York City at the time, and I remember going down to the International Newsstand at Times Square, and I bought Liberation, this newspaper from France, and I was flipping through it, and sure enough, there was a full page article about these computer files that I had uploaded to some computer in California being written about in Paris, and I just had this wash of recognition that, oh my god, everything just changed, that geography had sort of collapsed, and it was instant communications. And so that was the epiphany back then, was just this idea that everything was instantly connected. The similar moment I had with AI, with ChatGPT, was about a week or two after I had started playing with it. I was sitting with my wife one night. She was watching TV. I wasn't paying attention, and someone told me, "Oh, you can, it can do programming. ChatGPT can do programming." And for years, people had told me, "Oh, you should learn Python. You should learn Python." And I never learned it. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, you know, write me some Python code that takes an input and does something with it. And boom, all this Python code showed up. And then I had this embarrassing moment where I realized I don't even know how to run Python code. And normally you would have to call a friend and admit that, and right. And so I just said to ChatGPT, I don't know how to run Python code, and it told me. And then within 90 minutes, I had written a fully functional Python application that was making API calls to OpenAI and was generating social media content based on a user input. And that was the moment that, sort of 90 minutes into this thing, I had this fully functional Python application. I've never written a line of Python in my life. So that was the moment where AI for me transcended, this is some sort of system that responds to you, to, oh, this thing is actually allowing me to do something I couldn't do before. So I didn't have to learn Python code, and yet I was programming with Python code. So for me, that was the epiphany, that this tool is not just a tool to drive efficiency like we've always used computers, but the generative piece of it, the part where it was actually imparting knowledge and allowing me to amplify my ideas, that was the big breakthrough, and that was the moment for me.
Wonderful. You also started a newsletter that was called Everyday AI with Greg.
Uh-huh.
So, what was like why you stopped that? Then can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the point of Everyday AI, the reason for the title, was that, again, if you look at the average numbers, the amount of engineers and programmers and technical people in the world is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.5%. And what that says to me is that 98.5% of people are not that, right? So 98.5% of people are just living their lives. They're creatives, or they're business people, or they're just everyday people. And so the idea of Everyday AI was, we now live in a world, whether you know it or not, where the power of AI and machine learning is available to the everyday person. And so that was the idea for it. And the initial idea of that newsletter was just to talk about, what's coming out. Those early days, it was very much about, every time there would be a new announcement, everyone would pounce on it and figure out what it was and things like that. That first year, from 2022 through 2023, was very much about understanding what these tools were, what they made possible. It was all about the tools, and I would argue that we've kind of shifted. We ended up, stopping publishing Everyday AI, I think sometime late 2023 or early 2024, because the industry had kind of shifted from, let's talk about the tools to let's talk about what we can do with the tools. And so, similar to the Everyday AI newsletter, I also created the AI Salon and the AI Learning Lab TikTok channel, which now I also stream on YouTube. Really just talking about what are these tools, how do we use them, what does it mean, what's the future of work, what's the future of creativity, all the stuff that we're going to be talking about today.
Exactly. You talk a lot about democratizing
Mhm.
storytelling. What does that word really mean to you now in a world where everyone has a voice, including machines?
Well, so I don't think that the machines have a voice. Actually, I think that's actually a really important distinction. I think that a lot of the way people initially use AI is they think of it like this machine off to the side that's got its own intelligence. And there's a lot of arguments about AI can't be creative and the machine can't be creative and it can't have a point of view. It can have a point of view, right? It's a machine. It's if you look at the mechanism of how AI works, it's a calculator. What a lot of people are missing in the conversation is that when when AI is used as an augmentation of a human's ideas, that's when it gets powerful, right? It's not that AI is the genius, and you just. I think one of the expectations, probably because of sci-fi movies and because of how the technologists talk about it, and the fact that they're talking about artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence, people think about this machine as a thing that's going to replace us, as a thing that is the genius. And so we kind of push the AI button and we expect it to output genius. And very often what happens is you push the button and what it outputs is awful. It's just not good. And so a lot of people get discouraged by that. The reason it's not good is that AI is not a genius, it's actually a reflector. And it's a reflector of what you put into it. So what Google has taught us over the years is you put in sort of the minimal amount of information into a Google search and it provides you all of this, all of the links, right? And so they've kind of subconsciously trained us to not say much, just put in a few words. Like we don't even do complete sentences in Google, right? You just do the keywords and it's keyword optimization. And so when people treat ChatGPT or another large language model like that, it gives them really bad results. If you shift your mindset just slightly to understand that it's not a genius that's going to do the work for you, but rather it takes your ideas and amplifies them. When you start speaking with AI, when you start feeding your prompt, your ideas, your questions, your opinions, what it does then is it reflects that back to you in this amplified way. And so the best way I can think about AI is that it's it's an accelerator for getting ideas that are normally trapped in your head out of your head almost immediately. And then it does it in a way that you can look at that idea objectively and go, huh, that's really interesting. And that gives you another idea. And then you put that into the machine and then it gives you something back. And you're like, oh, that's not good. And then that forces you to think, well, if that's not good, what is good? And so what ends up happening is when you as a user shift your role from expecting it to deliver genius to you put yourself in the role almost like a music producer or a symphony conductor or a creative director where you've got the idea of what you want and then you're using idea to reflect that back to you and kind of build on it and amplify it. So rather than it being a single transaction, it's more like a collaborative conversation. The minute you make that mindset shift, AI absolutely transforms itself and and just becomes this um, massively powerful tool for creative self-expression or for any self-expression, not just creative self-expression, but for people getting their ideas out of their head and into the world powerfully.
like we used to take as advices from, our friends, from the people who we consider as as a respected person. Like we take advice from them that if we do that, what would be the outcome. So we can put it in
Hmm.
that way. We have a big brain, a bigger than us, more intelligent than us, and we can take advices from that. Like if I'm gonna launch a podcast, so could you give me some advices if what I have to do, how is gonna that
Hmm.
is going to work.
Yeah, and the powerful thing about, so one of the ways my brain works is, especially with new technology, I want to understand how it works. And when you learn about how the transformer architecture works, which is how all this stuff does what it does, and you understand about um, things like embeddings and the latent space, and you understand all the technical components of generative AI based on transformer, what you learn very quickly is that it's actually just a very relatively simple, it's a lot of high math, but it's a relatively simple probability calculator. It's a calculator, right? The way it works is it determines the probability of the next appropriate token to return a little fragment of a word, or a period or a space, whatever it might be. And and yet your experience when you interact with AI is that it feels much more human. It doesn't feel like a calculator. And for probably a year or a year and a half, I could not get my head around that that um disjointed experience where I understood what it was a calculator, but it felt much more human. And then a woman on X, on Twitter, made a post that all of a sudden just opened up my mind. And what she wrote was, artificial intelligence is the collective intelligence of humanity. And I've since written a book with Kevin Clark called the Collective Intelligence in the Age of AI. And what struck me, it hit me in the face, was that the reason AI feels human is that this probability calculator is the mechanism that we're using, but it's not what we're interacting with. What we're actually interacting with is the output of all of the people who've ever put anything on the internet for the past 7 or 8 decades, right? So the collective output of humanity is what's been put on the internet, right? And that's what chat gpt and large language models have been trained on. So when you're interacting with generative AI, you're literally collaborating with probably hundreds of millions or billions of people that have come before us that have put something on the internet. That's what makes it brilliant, but that's what also makes it maddening, because there's great stuff on the internet, there's bad stuff on the internet, there's accurate stuff on the internet, there's inaccurate stuff on the internet. So in order to get AI to behave, you need to actually understand that it's a massive pool of information that you're working with. And the reason that prompting correctly and treating it like a conversation rather than a transaction, and doing that back and forth, why providing context to AI is so important, is because that's what allows you to narrow the information set down to something that's going to give you actually valuable responses.
Exactly. In April 2023, you first time went live on TikTok, and your program, um, which is called Kyle Shannon Dreams, was started like kind of an kind of an experiment when you used to play sim racing, and then you thought that maybe I should go live regularly instead of just playing sim racing, and that's kind of how it all started. So could you talk about that? How was it like for you,
Sure.
going live on TikTok for the
Yeah.
first time? Then it has now become a very huge program. People learn about AI from
Yeah,
on
on the
TikTok.
AI Learning Lab. Well, Kyle Shannon Dreams was a kind of like a self portrait art project I did in 2022. So that was the thing that I was doing before ChatGPT came out. And then I started the AI Learning Lab, which was a TikTok channel where I was just creating content about AI. And it was April of 2023. You've done your research. I was every night after work, I would come home and I had a sim racing rig. And if you don't know what that is, it's where you've got a steering wheel and pedals and you race other people from around the world in virtual car races. And I would come home every night and I would do that for 2 or 3 hours. I would just sit there and race. I'd have dinner and spend some time with the family, and then I'd go sim racing. And I got more and more excited about AI. The more I learned about AI, the more excited I got about it. And I thought, what if I just committed for a year instead of sim racing for 2 hours, I go live on TikTok and just talk about this stuff. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was doing. I still to a large degree don't know what I'm doing. Um but I started these live sessions, and what my what I assumed would happen, or how it would work, is I would do these live sessions and it would go out there kind of like a show, kind of like a podcast, and then I would have, you know, consumers of that media. I thought it very much as like a media um relationship where I create content, people watch the content. But what ended up happening is that the same people started coming night after night after night after night. And it was kind of remarkable. And I remember one night, I was talking to them. When I do the show, I'm very, I don't know, informal, and I make a lot of jokes and things like that. And so maybe we're a month in or something like that. And the same people just keep showing up. And I just said, "You all are a bunch of weirdos." and and one of the weirdos, one of the people in the audience immediately responded, "We're not weird, we're irregular." And I just thought that was a hilarious name. And so they named themselves the Irregulars. And so the Irregulars are people that show up to the session night after night. Um, about 6 months into it, a good friend of mine, Cindy Kuhn, I was talking about the show and what I was doing, and I don't know what I was saying. And she goes, Kyle, she goes, "Do you know what's happening here? Do you know what's actually going on?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I talk." And she goes, "No, no, no." She goes, "This isn't about you anymore." She said, "When you're talking, there's a whole community interacting with each other. And when someone new comes in, they welcome them in and they tell them what's going on, and they have questions and they're answering them, and they're, pointing each other to the AI salon where they can go chat. There's this whole world happening." And so the thing that I learned about TikTok Live in particular is that it was very much a community interaction. It wasn't just me broadcasting out to an audience that was watching. It was this collaborative thing that was happening. Um, and then the other thing that I've learned over the years is that as AI accelerates and things become more complicated and there becomes more and more that you can do, any single person literally cannot keep up with what's happening. And in fact, I kind of set myself up for disappointment when I created a channel called the AI Learning Lab, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to tell you all the new stuff that's coming out. I'm going to tell you all the new stuff that's coming out." It was very much a tool centric approach to talking about this stuff. There became a point at which I was looking at this stuff 24/7. I couldn't keep up with it. And so there's been a transition in the channel, and there's been a transition in me and across the community to figuring out less, keeping up with all the tools, and more like, well, what do I actually want to do in the world? Like, what difference do I want to make? What do I enjoy doing? And figure out what you want to do in the world first, and then you can figure out, okay, which AI tools might support that. There's no way to really figure out how to do all this stuff without being in community. What happens when you're in a community is that everyone's got some little piece of the puzzle. And you're sitting there and you're like, "I need to figure this out. I need to figure this out." And you ask a question to the community, and like four people answer you. and they're all from such different perspectives that you're like, oh, I never would have even thought about it like that. So the way that you learn in a community versus how you learn individually, is just a radically different thing. And this was very much the case in the early days of the World Wide Web. Everyone was trying to figure it out. There was no manual for it. You couldn't go to school for UX design or for HTML, front end design, back end design, all the stuff that is normal now with web development. That took a lot of years to develop, right? With AI right now, with generative AI, even though AI has been around for decades, generative AI is different, right? This tool that gives access to the 98.5% of us that are not engineers, it's a different thing, and we're having to figure it out on the fly. And so being in a community of like-minded AI optimists that are, motivated to figure out whatever the heck this thing is, and figure out a way to take their ideas and bring them to life with these tools. Doing that in community is, in my opinion, the only way you can actually learn right now, probably for the next 5 years.
Exactly. And 2005, you started a precursor to Storyvine, something like that. What was that story, and um, where you learn what not to do in
Mm,
Storyvine? So, um,
yeah, that's great.
yeah.
So in 2005, YouTube came out, and as I was looking at the content of YouTube, two things struck me. The first one was a lot of the content wasn't very good. And what I recognized is that it wasn't very good because people were mistaking hitting the record button for storytelling. That they didn't really understand what storytelling was, right? At that point, you could create a blog, or you could type things, but creating video was a different kind of medium, and people didn't really understand storytelling narrative architecture. And so I thought there might be a way to provide them kind of uh, narrative training wheels, frameworks, templates for shows. And if we could do templates for shows, it would make it easier for people to do that. um, the other thing that struck me was that this idea of short form video, a 2 to 3 minute video, felt like something new. It felt like you've got a 2 hour movie, you've got a 1 hour drama format, you've got a 30-minute sitcom format. But what was the format for the 2 to 3 minute, 5 minute video? What's the short form thing? So I just had this idea that short form video was going to be important. So I kind of combined those two ideas, and I started a company called Episodic Studios. And the basic concept was, if I could do highly templatized short form TV shows, for lack of a better term, that maybe I could scale video production. And the basic idea was this: I was pitching, sports leagues like NASCAR about doing fan generated shows, right? At every level of the sport. Anyone who liked a driver, we'd give them the format, and then they could do a fan generated show. I was pitching CNN about doing news coverage this way, right? Every level of news, you could do it locally, you could do it nationally, and everything in between. I ended up getting hired by New Line Cinema to do entertainment content this way, entertainment news. And the episodic studios, even though it was highly templated short form video, it still required me to pack up my big computer and a bunch of camera equipment and fly to Los Angeles and find a room and bring the people that were going to be on the shows into the room and film them. And I don't know, 3 hours into my first day of my first job from my first client, and I realized, oh my God, I've made a terrible mistake. That there was, even though the theory was, if you highly templatize video production, so long as you're physically having to film people in person, and then you're generating 4 hours of media that you then need to edit out 2 to 3 minutes of good content, as long as you're doing all that, there's nothing scalable about it. And I had scaled, agency.com. I had scaled a service business before. So I know what that was like. I didn't want to do that again. So I ended up shutting the company down because I realized that video production inherently is not scalable. And then I had the idea for Storyvine a few years later, which was basically, what if you could automate everything? What if you could automate the capture of the content, the structure of the storytelling. And then if you could get that all into a database, then maybe, just maybe, you could automate the editing of that story. And so that's what we ended up building, and that's what we patented for Storyvine. And we're 13 and a half years in, and still going strong.
Exactly. But that thing really taught you about Storyvine, and it really helped you. The things you've learned throughout that time. You applied those experiences. And try to you know because you were aware of the things you did before, so it helped in
Yeah,
Storyvine.
absolutely. And that's, a couple of things happen when you have an idea. Like the idea I had about short form video is going to be important, and providing narrative frameworks was important. That idea stuck with me. How you actually execute that, that's the thing that changes. And as an entrepreneur, one of the things that, I can maybe offer is, if you have an idea for a business, what you should really do is think about not so much what's all the good stuff that can happen, but know that a year in, or 6 months in, or 3 years in, something's going to go wrong. Like in the case of Episodic Studios, I realized that my core premise of the business was incorrect. And so I ended up shutting that company down. And for normal people, when you shut a company down like that, you would, just lick your wounds and go run away. For entrepreneurs, if the idea is strong enough, the idea will persist. And that was what happened in this case, is that the idea persisted. And then over years of thinking about it, I thought, oh, there might be a way to do this. And then, that ultimately led to Storyvine, but it took a long time. So I would say, if anyone is thinking about starting something, make sure that the core idea that you have really resonates with you and you really believe in. Because if you just do it for the external things, when you hit those brick walls and those roadblocks, which you do when you start anything, right? You hit those challenges. If you don't have a deep enough conviction for the core idea, you'll quit. And that's why most businesses don't make it past a year, is not because it wasn't a good business. It's because the entrepreneur doesn't have the drive, because it's not, it's not something that's deeply important to them. And so that's one of the lessons I learned in that, is that idea was strong enough inside me that it drove me to keep going.
Exactly. You've led teams through both massive success and tough pivots. What's lessons you only learn after running out of options?
Well, one of them is exactly what I just said. That is is your idea is the idea for the business, is the idea for the project. It doesn't have to be a business, could be a creative project. Is the idea strong enough inside you that you can weather those storms? And I'll tell you a specific time in Storyvine's history. We had raised our seed round. We'd hired a bunch of people, and we knew we were going to be, trillionaires, right? We knew it was going to be really easy. We are going to make all these templates, and we're going to put them in the world, and everyone's going to buy them, and we're going to be rich. And so we were trying to sell Storyvine to everyone, from air conditioner repair people to do, promo videos, to we worked with IBM to do internal communications. We worked with a pharma company to do, patient stories and things like that. And 9 months later, we ran out of money. And so we literally went from having a staff of, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9, to we laid everyone off. And my co founder and I cut our salaries in half. And we decided to focus on pharmaceutical marketing, because the money that we made from the pharma client um, meant less to them than the $500 we got from the air conditioner repair guy, because that $500 was a lot to him. And it was harder to deal with that client than the big money from pharma. So we decided to focus on pharma. And we basically struggled to survive for the next year to 18 months. It was a deep struggle. I was not making enough money to support my family. Every morning, every morning, I would wake up and the immediate thought in my head was, I don't want to do this. I want to quit. And then the next thing that would pop in my head is, if you quit, Storyvine ceases to exist. And then I would go back and forth and back and forth. And as I would drive down to Denver, I was living in Boulder at the time. I was driving down to Denver to meet with my co-founder and to run the business. And I remember one day, it was a really tough week, and I made the decision that morning. Okay, I'm going to drive down to Denver, and I'm going to tell Monique, this is it. We're going to shut down the company. And on the drive down, I was just thinking about this conversation, and I was thinking about, what am I going to do next? And the answer to what I was going to do next was some version of Storyvine. like it was the like it, if I stopped doing Storyvine in its current form, what I was going to do was figure out how I could do the next version of it. And so I thought, well, if what I'm going to do is Storyvine, I might as well not quit, right? And that that lesson of just persisting, I think with entrepreneurship, there's the initial adrenaline rush of starting the thing, and I think a lot of people get seduced into that. It's not until you have a year and a half of every morning waking up wanting to quit and not quitting, like, there's something there is something, just not normal about that, right? And so you really do have to be connected to the idea, because otherwise you won't weather those storms.
Exactly. And there was also a part, and it all happened around 2014, if I'm not wrong,
Mhm.
right?
Yep, exactly.
And you also got the book Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey
Mhm.
Moore.
Yeah.
And that book also, motivated you throughout that time, throughout
Well,
that
that came
tough
from
time.
my co-founder Monique. So I knew the book Crossing the Chasm, but one of the core ideas in Crossing the Chasm, and Crossing the Chasm, is you've got early adopters, and then you have this chasm, and then you have the people that adopt technology after that, and jumping that chasm, surviving that thing where you stop selling to the early adopters and you get to mass adoption. That's a really challenging chasm. And one of the keys to getting through that is you choose what they call a beachhead. You choose a single target market. And so we did some deep analysis on all the different options that we had, from franchises to small businesses to education and training to HR. And we ended up going with pharma marketing because we had access and they could write big checks, and we had a solution that solved a problem they had. But that came directly out of that book. And that was actually Monique, my co-founder. One of her requirements to keep doing Storyvine was, Kyle, you as the inventor and the hand wavy guy, you can't just go sell to anyone. We're going to pick a beachhead and we're going to commit to it, and we're going to lean in, and we're going to survive because of that. And that ended up being the case.
Exactly. Um, that is incredible. Do you think there's a danger that as AI gets more creative, we'll lose our hunger to create, or will it actually push us to go deeper into what makes us human?
Yeah, it's I think it is a trope that people use to stay on the sidelines, to say that if AI is creative, then it makes us less creative. That's only true if you treat it like I said earlier. If you treat AI as a replacement of you, it can make you yeah, it would be less creative, right? If you say, I'm a filmmaker, I'm just going to push a button and it's going to make a film, and then that's at odds with who I am as a human. But that's not how it's really powerful. How it's really powerful is you kind of strap AI on like a jetpack, and you say, I've got this idea, and you put it in and it reflects it back to you in this kind of new and crazy way. And then that gives you new ideas. And then you put those ideas into the machine and it kind of mixes them together and it reflects that back to you. So what I'm finding is that it's not making me less creative, it's making me more creative. Because instead of getting one idea out of my head over the course of a month, I can get 10 ideas out of my head in a week, and I can realize them and see them. And then there's a follow on amplifying effect, which is before AI, if I had an idea and I got that idea out of my head and then I realized, oh, I should do some, financial analysis or some research to see if this is a good idea. Well, I'm not a financial analyst and I'm not a researcher. I'm not good at that. I have ADHD. Research and me don't go well together. Like I read a paragraph and I'm like, that's enough for me. And like that's not research. Well, now with I can actually go do financial analysis. I can actually go do research. I can now make songs beyond even though I've got a guitar and I write songs, I'm not a good musician. I'm not a deep musician, but now with AI, I can. So all of the places where I historically have had gaps in my ability to self-express, AI fills in those gaps. So as long as you're sitting in the center as kind of this producer role with the idea and you're holding the fidelity of the idea, then AI is there to amplify that idea and fill in all of your execution gaps. And so I would say quite the contrary. It doesn't take our creativity away. It like amplifies it times 1,000. And it's insane and it's inspiring. But if you just sit on the outside of it, because it is powerful at creating things, you can absolutely look at it and go, oh, that's a threat to humanity. But the minute you strap it on and use it as your personal self expression engine, it's completely liberating.
Exactly. There was also a time in your life when you moved to New York to
Mhm.
pursue acting, and that is like today that is kind of vanished, you know, from the screen. So what was that like, and why didn't you stick to the acting career, and why
Well,
did you
I,
left
didn't-
that?
I didn't stick to the acting career because I didn't want to eat macaroni and cheese out of a box for the rest of my life. Well, what I ended up learning, what you learn if you go into a life in the arts, life in the theater, painter, writer, whatever it might be, is that the world is not asking for another off Broadway play. The world is not asking for your painting. The world is not asking for the novel idea that you have. Artists by definition are entrepreneurs, right? If you move to New York City, you have to be driven. Like you have to be so passionate about it that you're willing to eat macaroni and cheese out of a box or tuna out of a can, for years, right? And just struggle and hustle and do that sort of thing. So by definition, you have to hustle. And so when I was in New York, I didn't have an agent. I met a bunch of people that I liked and we wanted to do plays together, but we didn't there was no theater, so we decided to create our own theater company. And so we got together, we started a theater company, we would workshop plays in Vermont, we would rent theaters in New York City, we would put on shows. And the fantasy was always, someone be in the audience and it would take off or whatever. And then I decided after 4.5 years of that, I would try to write myself an acting career. So I went through a period where I wrote a bunch of screenplays. And then the World Wide Web came along and I knew enough about computers. I was doing computers as my day job. I always had this sort of art and science kind of, left and right brain thing that I had. And so when the World Wide Web came out, I just saw it as another channel to take that creative spark and drive that took me to New York for acting. And I just put it straight into World Wide Web development. And I started, the online magazine and I started agency.com as a result of that. So for me, the through line is always the drive and the passion about what I'm trying to do in the world, what I'm trying to communicate or accomplish. And what's changing is the tools around me and the ways to do self expression.
Exactly. So what was your favorite role as an actor?
um, well, we did a lot of original plays, so doing original plays is always nice. I wrote a one man show that I was really proud of. I did a I still get residual checks. I did a walk on a very very small part in New Jack City in the '90s, and that was fun because I had never been in a movie before, and I was actually on a film set, so that was fun and memorable.
Exactly. And also Three Penny Opera directed by Paul,
Hmm.
Giovanni, where you maybe did two smart roles there.
Yeah, I did. I forget the name of the characters, but one of them was uh, just a young boy, like a servant boy, and then in the second act, I played a an Indian or a Pakistani, I don't know, a
Oh,
criminal, yeah.
really?
And so at the act break, I would put on full makeup and come out, and I had an Indian accent. It was crazy. That was fun though. But Paul Giovanni, he was a Broadway director. He's passed on. May he rest in peace. But he was an incredibly talented director, and that was my first equity job in Washington D.C. at the only theater. And that was when I decided to move to New York City and just go for it. I was supposed to go to the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, but I called him up 2 weeks before and I said, "I'm going to New York. Sorry." And that's when I moved to New York City. Was after that role.
Wonderful. So in acting, we learn a lot of things, including patience. Patience is, one of those. What did you learn throughout your acting career that still applies in your current life?
I think this is a really good one, just for AI tools in general. One of the things that you learn in acting school is you learn a lot of the techniques. You learn how to talk, and you learn how to move your body and things like that. And when you first learn, when you first get aware of all the technical things, it seems very foreign to you. Um, and the goal is to practice it enough that it becomes natural so that you can just act like a natural person in a scene, even though you're adding all these mechanical components. AI is very, very much the same way, where there's a lot of technical things to learn. But what you want to do is you want to get to the point that you can be very facile with those tools and just navigate um, between the elements of your ideas, and just know, okay, I need to use this tool here, and I need to modify that prompt that way. So incorporating just, I saw a thing on LinkedIn that 10,000 prompts is the new 10,000 hours, right? Malcolm Gladwell talked about the 10,000 hour rule, that you need to put in 10,000 hours to get good at something, masterful at something. And I would say it's like that with AI, that you just need to use it and use it and use it until you understand the personalities of the tools so that you can instinctively use them well.
Exactly. Maybe probably 1 year ago, you've mentioned the ChatGPT. At that time, ChatGPT was really one of the biggest AI tools. So to talk about ChatGPT, number one, then number second, Claude, and then number third was Perplexity. And you also mentioned about its particular feature, which is called Pages, and Perplexity was and is still coded for the research. So if I ask the same question again, um, what are the biggest and greatest AI tools in 2025?
Right now, so
So
I
what
have to
would
go.
be?
It's actually top of the hour. I have to run to a client call. But what I would say is this: just start with ChatGPT. You can use Claude, you can use Perplexity, but ChatGPT at this point is about 25 different tools. Even the free version of it is so capable, most people are not even scratching the surface. So I would say dig into ChatGPT and just practice, 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 and it will serve you. And mentally think about it as an amplifier of your ideas rather than a replacement of you, and that will change everything. But I have to take off. But really nice speaking with you, Fahad. I hope you have a fantastic evening, and really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us, and it was really a great conversation and a great podcast. I hope the questions that were, moving in my audience mind are cleared now. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us, taking time watching this conversation. Inshallah, meet you soon with